Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be looking at building this green dial diamond bezel Day-Date. So starting off, we got a few more components than usual. We have a presidential style bracelet. These are our baton style hands loomed with BGW9, followed by our NH36 movement. Our Day-Date style case with a diamond bezel. This is the dial and aftermarket date and date wheel we'll be using. And finally, a cyclops. Wasting no time getting started, gonna get out the movement holder and place the movement dial side up this time, as I'm gonna take care of switching out the day and date wheels first. This is the first time the NH36 has been featured on the channel, and the big distinguishing factor between it and the NH35 is that it contains a day module. This day wheel can be set independently from the date wheel, and we got a new camera angle. So stepping up the production, and now the video will be out of focus in two different ways. Back to the date wheel. It can be set independently from the date and typically contains two languages. I believe the standard is Japanese and English. The wheel is held in place using a C-clamp, so you've seen me using a screwdriver to try to pry that up, and then here I'm using my tweezers to actually remove it. Once that C-clip has been removed, the day wheel will simply come right off. Normally, the day of the week is represented by 3 letters displayed in an elongated window at the 3 o'clock position. I personally have never liked the look of this and felt it made the dial unequal, if that makes sense. Now with that C-clamp removed, I'm doing my best here to remove the date wheel, but finding it difficult to get my tweezers into a little nook or cranny to actually pull off the date wheel. Being a bit more aggressive, I was able to elevate the wheel just a little bit and snuck my tweezers in there, and it comes right off with no further issues. I removed a date wheel from an NH35 when I built that watch for Braden Barrett. This will be done in the exact same way. Starting off, there's 4 screws that need to be unscrewed and removed from the movement. Once that's done, I'll be able to remove the date indicator maintaining plate from the movement. Once that's out of the way, I'll be able to remove the date wheel, which Seiko actually calls a date dial in the technical drawings I'm looking at right now. And one important thing to not move or remove is the actual date jumper, as that's quite a pain to get back into place. Then to reassemble, it's just doing everything in reverse. Placing the new date disc into place, putting the date indicator maintaining plate back in, and then screwing down those 4 screws. It looks like I need to work a bit faster as I explain that whole process, and only now am I removing the screws from the movement. I think technically I'm supposed to remove these as I unscrew them, but we break a few rules on this channel. One screw ended up being a bit more stubborn than the others, so a few more turns of the screwdriver and I'm able to pull it right out. Here what I'm going to do is hold down the date jumper plate with the screwdriver in my left hand, and then using the tweezers in my right, I'll be able to pull off the date indicator maintaining plate. Again, just doing my best to not agitate that date jumper and have to reset it down the line. Using the same technique here, just holding down the date jumper, and then I'm going to pull off the date disc. And just like that, we're down to the base movement. So, time to start putting it back together. So you may be thinking, wait, why did he change the date disc? This one looks exactly the same. Well, as with most things in this build, it's loomed with BGW9. So even in the dead of night, you'll be able to see that it's the 31st, or the 17th, or the 2nd. Getting a date wheel into place can be a bit tricky, as there's nothing holding the date disc into place, and you have to get that date jumper plate into its specific groove. Sometimes it likes to slip under the date disc, other times it likes to just kick the date disc out of place. Now I'm going to lie and say that I did this on my first try, but we both know that that's not the truth. But what is the truth is I'm holding the date jumper plate down with the screwdriver in my left hand, and then I'm going to use my tweezers to pull the jumper into its specific groove, and that will maintain the date wheel. Then I'll place the date indicator maintaining plate back into its place, align it correctly with the 4 holes, and then place the screws down, and that will actually hold down the date wheel. Unlike when I remove the screws, I'm actually going to place them one by one and then screw them down individually, just so that I can get even pressure on the plate. What I mean by that is I'll be placing the screws and screwing them down almost all the way, but leaving a little bit of wiggle room so that it can come back later once every screw is in place and give it a final turn. This, of course, is an attempt to avoid the plate being angled at any degree. And as you can see, I'm letting my true skills shine here as I struggle to screw down the first screw. After looking at it for a second, I decided that it was the screw's fault and I removed it from the movement. In actuality, what I want to do is test and make sure that everything is in place before screwing down the plate and potentially damaging the movement. You'll see here I'm pushing down on the plate with my tweezers. This will maintain pressure on the actual date disc, and then rotating the crown counterclockwise in the first position quick sets the date. And with everything looking good and the date changing, I can get back to struggling to screw in the screws. Luckily, now that everything's aligned a little bit better, I had no problem screwing in all 4 screws. And eventually, with some patience and a little bit of editing, we arrive at the point where the date wheel is now securely in place. Just double checking on the quick set function to make sure that it still operates as it should and that nothing is binding. It's always good to check and make sure the functions you're messing with are still working properly. And if you feel any kind of binding or grinding, stop immediately. Giving the screw one final turn to put it securely in place, and then again, double checking the quick set function. Then here I'm going to wind the crown to set the time on the watch to midnight and make sure that the date still flicks over as it should. And then giving it a few extra turns to make sure that it's out of the danger zone. I don't want to have to call Kenny Loggins. You know, Top Gun, Danger Zone. So with the date wheel now installed, we can move on to one of the very fun aspects of this build, the date wheel. Unlike the aftermarket and stock date disc, this date wheel is very different from the stock counterpart. I'm sure the first thing you'll notice is that the day of the week is now spelled out in full and only features the days in English, and that the days of the week are written in a completely new position. One thing you won't be able to notice, but I'm sure comes at no surprise at this point, is that the day wheel is also loomed with BGW9. So the first question to ask is, how is this all going to work? The day function on the NH36 operates on a 2-click per 24-hour cycle. So every 24 hours, the day wheel advances 2 positions. For instance, if the day wheel is displaying Wednesday, it has to click through the Japanese Wednesday to get to English Thursday. So now, with the new day wheel only displaying the days of the week in English, it can take up both of those spots, allowing the full day to be written out. This wheel, when used in conjunction with the dial you'll see soon, will display the full day in the middle of the dial at the 12 o'clock position. You'll see that the installation of this day disc is both easy and difficult. It just requires that you put it in place, but getting everything to align properly can be a little bit of a challenge. Again, here I'm using the tweezers to apply a little bit of pressure to the day disc and then rotating the crown to change the day displayed using the quick set function. And with that working, I'm confident that everything is aligned and all the gears are meshing together. I'll bring the stock C-clamp back out and get that in place. And then it's time to test everything. You can see that the quick set function is working as it should. Checking the date function as well. Again, pulling the crown out to its final position to set the time to midnight, just to make sure that everything still flicks over when it should. Unfortunately, the date and the day will not flick over at the same time. The date will flick over at midnight, with the day finally settling into position around 3 in the morning. So now let's talk a little bit about this dial and how it ties in extremely well for the young lady who this watch was built for. This watch is actually a birthday present / collaboration with a good friend of mine named Gisel. And after finding out that I actually built watches, things just kept lining up and we land on this beautiful piece you see in front of you. I knew that these day-date dial conversion kits existed, I just couldn't get past the Snoopy on the dial. Don't get me wrong, the Peanuts were always fun to watch, especially around the holidays, and Snoopy is a great character. The play on the Red Baron would always give me a chuckle, but I didn't want Snoopy on my watch dial. However, there was one person that loved the idea of having Snoopy on the dial, Gisel. She loves that little beagle. Yes, Snoopy is a beagle. Somehow. She has a Snoopy tote bag, Snoopy blanket, pajamas. For her birthday this year, she went to the Snoopy History Museum. A true Snoopy lover. It should come at no surprise that she has 2 little dogs of her own, Milo and Bella. Milo is a 6-month-old Yorkie, and with him still being a puppy, he's full of energy and can't sit still. He always has to be moving, licking, or biting. Then there's Bella, a 12-year-old Chihuahua. As to be expected, Bella is the exact opposite of Milo, more calm and collected. Though she's told me, even in her old age, Bella can still put Milo in his place when she needs to. Just a quick reference back to the video, you saw that I lined up the dial and then cut off 2 of the dial feet that I did not need, and here I'm filing down the leftover nubs just to make sure that the dial sits flush against the little spacer ring. And with those nubs filed down, I can break the movement back out and focus on setting the dial in place. All that's left to do to secure the dial in place is line up the now 2 feet on it with the holes in the movement holder and then press it down into place, making sure that everything is aligned. You'll see I give it a few more presses and then I pull out the crown to check that everything is still functioning as it should and that the day and date still quickset. And it looks like it's working as it should, so I can look forward to setting the hands. So I've already talked about why Snoopy means so much to Gisel, but now let's talk about the meaning behind the green. Obviously, green is Gisel's favorite color, but there's a great story behind why that is. Now, Gisel has a set of green eyes, but she told me that her grandfather has a set of the greenest eyes she's ever seen. She told me that when they were out together, she couldn't stop staring at them. She would always compare everything green to his eyes, but nothing could match their color. They were a mix of sage green with a touch of blue. Nowadays, everybody tells her that she has his eyes, but she still thinks that there was something special about his. That's why her favorite color is green. It's always reminded her of him. I often talk about how watches can have a special story behind them, and I don't know if there's a better example than Gisel's. Moving on back to the build, I've set the time to midnight, and you'll see I'm placing the hour hand and aligning it with the top indice right here. I think technically we have another first for the channel, in that I'm using baton style hands. In the build for my girlfriend, we also used baton style hands, but they were not the same as these, much smaller if you remember. And of course, going with the theme of this build, they are loomed with BGW9. I've lined up the hour hand here and pressed it into place. So what I'll do next is just rotate the hand all the way around the dial, just to make sure that there is no instances of it hitting any of the indices or stopping for any other reason. And it looks like I'm good. The hand rotates all the way around, no issues, and the date flicks over right when it should. I did see that the hand was sitting a little bit higher than I like, so I'm going to give it one final push to secure it in place. Or maybe a few final pushes. With the hour hand now securely in place, I can move on to setting the minutes hand. And it looks like I've done something different here and aligned the hour hand with the 6 o'clock marker, and then set the minute hand to the 12 o'clock marker. No real difference in doing this, as 12 o'clock represents 12 o'clock no matter what time it is. Just strange that I decided to start doing it a different way all of a sudden. Regardless, I persevere, and with the minute hand now looking good, I'm going to press it into place using the red tipped hand setting tool. And with that now on the pinion, all that's left to do is rotate the hands all the way around the dial just to make sure that there's no contact. Looks like everything's good, so again, just going to give it one final push down into place, and we'll move on to the second hand. Actually, I lied, because I made that adjustment. Everything needs to be rechecked, just to make sure that it didn't get fouled up in the process. Now with the hand set to midnight, because I love consistency apparently, I'm going to use my hand setting tool with a little bit of Rodico in the tip to pick up the second hand, and then just align it with the pinion, and with one push, it'll seat. And with a little wiggle, it's on. Ever since I saw that video, this has become my favorite technique for setting second hand. I'm going to use the tip that doesn't have Rodico in it just to press down the hand a little bit further, getting it a little bit closer to the minute hand just to make sure that it doesn't make contact with the crystal once the movement is all cased up. Have to be super gentle here and precise, as it only takes one little slip to completely ruin a second's hand, and then back to the drawing board. Moving on to the case, it's another few firsts for the channel. First Day-Date style case and first diamond bezel. Opening up the case, I find this wavy metal retaining ring within it, so I'm just going to pull that right out. These are much more aesthetically pleasing and easier to use than the plastic rings found in other cases. It also means that the case has a much tighter tolerance to the size of the movement, which overall is good as it eliminates a lot of that play some cases do have. Here I'm just using a microfiber to clean off the outside and the inside of the crystal, as well as those 100% real diamonds. Wink wink, nudge nudge. When Gisel and I were first discussing the case and what kind of bezel she'd like, I really thought she'd go with a fluted or a smooth bezel, but to my surprise, she really liked the diamonds, and it gave me another opportunity for something new on the channel. In preparation for putting the movement in the case, I'm going to remove the crown. And then I'll go forth and continue to clean the inside of the case as well as the inside of the crystal. I'm still waiting to buy my little compressor so that I can blow off the dust from the outside and inside of these cases. One thing I did purchase was something called a lens pen, which is often used in photography. However, why not use it on watch crystals? That will be showcased in a video down the line. With the case now nice and clean, I can drop the movement into it. To do this, the first thing I have to do is release the movement and flip it over and place it back into the movement holder. Then, using a pair of tweezers, I'm going to depress a lever on the movement that will release the crown stem and the crown. Then I'm free to place the movement onto this nice soft pad, and I'll just place the case over top of it. One semi-downside in using a case that does not use a plastic movement holder is that the tolerances are rather tight, and sometimes the movement does have to be pushed into the case. Here you'll see I'm lining up where the crown will enter the movement with the crown tube on the case. Then I'm just going around the movement using a screwdriver to push down on the movement and seat it in the case properly. And with a few pushes, the movement is now secured in the case, and it's looking pretty good. Getting towards the end of the build now, it's time to cut down the crown stem. So starting off, I'm tightening the crown that came with the case onto the extra crown stem that came with the movement, and then threading it through the case and into the movement. Then taking a pair of calipers, I'm going to put one side on the back of the crown and the other side on the case, and then depress the crown. The measurement given there is the amount of the crown stem that needs to be removed. Pulling the crown stem out and then unscrewing the crown from it, I'll place the crown stem back down on the mat, and then using that previous measurement, I'll mark it off with a Sharpie. I've said this before and I'll say it again. It's always best to measure twice, cut once, and when you do make that cut, leave a little bit extra. I asked Gisel if she thought that this was going to be a piece that she wore on special occasions or something she wore every day, and I was delighted to hear that she's been wearing it every day since it was given to her. Following that question, I asked if she had a Grail watch in mind, and I half expected her to say that this was it. However, her face lit up and she explained that the Ballon Bleu de Cartier was her favorite watch. Which is interesting because if I remember right, I have a male friend that also said that he was interested in that watch. She also mentioned that she liked the Panthère de Cartier, which is also a ladies like Santos watch. For all the French people rolling in their graves over my pronunciation, I apologize. You'll have seen in the video that I cut down the crown stem to the correct size before using a Dremel to smooth out and cone off the edges. And I've just tightened down the crown onto the crown stem, and now I'm pushing it through the case into the movement to see if it's the correct length. This time it took me a little bit to push in and screw on the crown, but eventually I get it, and it worked like a charm. I found this to be more of an issue when I'm wearing finger cots rather than using my bare fingers. The finger cots seem to slip around a little bit when trying to push the crown onto the threads. It's always best to double check that the fit is correct before moving on to the next step, which involves Loctite. But before we get to that next step, it's critical that I remove this little piece of dust that somehow got into the movement. Luckily, I was able to see it before casing it up. I'm going to place a tiny drop of blue Loctite into this plastic container and then take the crown stem and dip the threaded end into it. Then after I refocus the camera, I'm just going to screw the crown back onto the crown stem. See, I'm learning. It only took me 10 videos, but I figured out that focus is pretty important. While the Loctite cures, I can use this time to lube up a few of the gaskets found around the watch. Starting off with the crown tube gasket, I'm going to take a micro Q-tip and run that through some scuba diving grease. I know in a previous video I mentioned that I stole a few of these from work. I have since purchased about 500 of them, so if anybody from work is watching this, don't come after me. After lubing up the crown tube gasket, I can lube up the gaskets found on the actual crown. And then I can break out the grease-soaked sponge and place the case back gasket within it, give it a few turns to get it all lubed up, and call that done. This time the gasket decided to stick to the top of the jar, which is a first, but all I need to do is use some tweezers, pick it up, place it into the groove in the back of the case, and then make sure it's seated properly. In previous videos, you've seen that for one reason or another, these case back gaskets can be a little bit too big or a little bit too small. And though there's ways to get around this, it's not ideal. Luckily enough for me, this case back gasket was the perfect size and fit right in its groove. With the Loctite now set, I can push the crown stem through the case for the final time and into the movement, making sure to tighten it all the way down to the case. I can pull that metal spacer ring back out and place it right on top of the movement. Then just using my finger to press it into place before I bring back out the case back and tighten it down. Oftentimes I'll turn these case backs the wrong way just to make sure that the threads line up correctly before tightening it down all the way. Giving it a quick visual inspection before I tighten it down as much as I can using my fingers before moving on to the case back tightening tool. The yellow rubber ball doesn't get too much love these days just because that case back tightening tool is much better. The rubber ball is good for getting case backs off though. So just lining up the teeth on the case back with the teeth on the tool and then torquing it down a little bit. As you'll see, it starts off pretty easy to turn, which means I didn't tighten it that much with my fingers apparently. But eventually I get to where it's really torqued down to ensure maximum water resistance. With the case back now fully tightened down, I'm going to go ahead and unscrew the crown and wind the hands around a little bit. A, to make sure that this is still working, and B, I saw that the day was just about to change, and I'd rather have it fully changed before the next step. Continuing on with the theme of first for the channel, I'm going to set a cyclops in place. I'm not sure what happened when I was ordering all the parts for this build, but I failed to realize that the case I purchased did not have a date cyclops. So I had two options. I could either purchase another case or purchase a cyclops and stick it on. I think in most cases what I would do is just purchase another case with a crystal already installed that has a date cyclops. However, with this case having a diamond bezel, I wasn't too sure how popular it would be going forward and if I should have another one in stock. So I went with option B, measured out a cyclops I had on a watch of mine, and then purchased a similar one. I also had to purchase UV glue, which you just saw me place on the backside of the cyclops, and that was the first mistake I made. What I should have done was place the drop of UV glue onto the actual crystal. As now I was forced to pick up the date cyclops, rotate it in the air, and then place it down onto the crystal. Surprisingly, that movement went alright, and now the next struggle is to make sure that everything is lined up nice and square. So just using some plastic tweezers, I'm going to nudge these cyclops up, down, left, and right until I get to a place where I'm happy and I feel like it's centered. Included with the UV glue was this UV pen, which, after holding it over the glue for a few seconds, cures it in place. It's also great for charging up lume, come to find out. Under this thing, that BGW9 lights up almost instantly when compared against a regular flashlight. A little bit of the UV glue got squished out after I pushed down on the cyclops. No big deal, as soaking a Q-tip in acetone and then rubbing it on the exposed areas is enough to remove it. I've also seen videos where if you need to remove a date cyclops, the best way is to hit it with high heat real briefly and then slip something in under the cyclops and pry it off. Luckily enough for me, I was happy with the alignment. Everything cleaned up very nicely, so it didn't come to that. I'm going to jump cut here and skip ahead a little bit. It took me a little bit longer than expected to remove all the excess glue, which again was a mistake of me not just placing a small drop on the crystal itself. So magically now, with the crystal completely clean, I'm just wiping off the excess acetone with a microfiber. And now it's time to put on the bracelet, which means we're really in the home stretch. So as I mentioned in the parts list, we're using a presidential style bracelet for this build. It's a rather simple design with brushed shoulders and polished center links and flanks. The one I'm using here also features a hidden clasp. And I have to be honest, when it arrived, I could not get it open to save my life. There is this small circular pull tab that in your head you go, okay, let's just pull up on this and it should release. However, as much as I tried, I couldn't get it to open. Eventually, through some trial and error, I was able to find out that a little bit of tension on the clasp was enough to get it to open when prompted. And Gisel has reported that she's had no issues opening it up, so I guess a little bit of wearing in was required. One additional thing that was required was the removal of permanent links. Gisel is also a very dainty girl with a small wrist, and the bracelet did not come with enough removable links to wear comfortably. Having a hidden clasp also means that the bracelet does not feature a glide lock or an easy link, so there was no way to tighten it up there. So I took the watch to an actual watchmaker, not just some dummy who moonlights as one on the internet, and the actual watchmaker was able to pull off the permanent links and size it correctly to her wrist. However, I was able to install the bracelet myself, as it follows the same steps as the Oyster and Jubilee style bracelets seen on this channel before. Thread the spring bar through the end link, and then place that whole assembly between the lugs, ensuring that the spring bar has snapped into position in the drilled holes in the lugs. And now with both ends of the bracelet secured in place, all it's left to do is make it whole again by lining up these two links and screwing the screw through them. With that screw tightened down, we're done. And here she is, our NH36 green dial Snoopy Day-Date. I'm super pleased with how this build came out. Everything from the movement modifications to the dial, to the diamond bezel, to the bracelet, it all just ties so well together. Of course, I want to give a big thank you to Gisel for allowing me this opportunity to build this watch for her. It's got a great story behind it. I'm glad you're wearing it every day, and I wish you the best of luck in your next endeavor. I also want to say thank you to all of you out there watching these videos. We recently hit 500 subscribers, which is pretty crazy. I always enjoy seeing all the support there is in the comments and talking with you guys there. I know I'm still a pretty small channel, but I got some pretty big ideas. Hoping to have those ideas featured in a video pretty soon. If you or someone you know are looking at commissioning a piece, please reach out to me at goldenstatewatchshop@gmail.com or at goldenstatewatchshop on Instagram, and I'd be happy to discuss any future projects with you. And as always, we're going to finish this one off by looking at the watch in some natural light. Thanks for watching.